Imagine, if you will, that you are lying in the dark, the covers pulled up to your chin, the last light of the lamp slowly fading to a warm orange glow. Outside, the world is quiet, maybe a distant car or the soft hush of wind against the window. Now take a breath, a slow, deep breath, and let it out just as slowly. Feel how easy it is to breathe here at sea level or wherever you happen to be. The air is thick and generous, full of oxygen, practically handing you each breath without a second thought. Now imagine, if you can, a place where breathing is not so effortless. A place where the air is thin, where each lungful feels like a small victory, where the sky is a deeper blue than you have ever seen, and the mountains rise so high they seem to scrape the edges of the stars. This is the world of the Incan messengers, the chasquis, the runners of the mountain roads. And tonight, we are going to travel there, not with our feet, but with our minds, slowly, gently, as if we are drifting on a current of warm air over the Andes. Close your eyes, if they are not already closed. Feel your body relaxing into the mattress, the pillow cradling your head. Let the sounds of your room fade until all you hear is my voice, and maybe, very faintly, the whisper of an ancient wind. Because that is what we are going to follow. The wind along the spine of the world, along the roads that the Inca built, roads that still exist, carved into the mountainsides, worn by centuries of feet. And among those feet, the fastest, the most dedicated, were the runners who carried messages from one end of the empire to the other. Now, when you think of a messenger, what do you see? Perhaps a person on a bicycle, or in a van, or a little envelope with wings on it in a cartoon. But in the time of the Inca, there were no horses, no wheels, no postal trucks. The empire, the largest in the pre-Columbian Americas, stretched for thousands of miles, from what is now Colombia all the way down to Chile and Argentina. And the only way to send a message from the capital, Cusco, to the far reaches of that empire was by human legs. Specifically, by the legs of young men trained from boyhood to run, not on level ground, but up and down steep mountain trails, at altitudes that would make most of us gasp and stop after just a few steps. Let us sit with that image for a moment. Picture a trail narrow, perhaps only a couple of feet wide, winding along the face of a cliff. Below, a deep valley, so far down the river looks like a silver thread. Above, the snow-capped peak of a mountain, so high it seems to touch the sky. The air is cold and thin, carrying the scent of stone and ice and wild herbs. And on this trail, a runner. He is barefoot, or wearing only sandals made of woven fibers, his feet tough as leather. He wears a simple tunic, a woven cap, and he carries a small pouch and a conch shell trumpet, which he will blow as he approaches a way station to announce his arrival. And he is running. Not a jog, not a leisurely trot, but a steady, powerful, rhythmic run that he can sustain for miles and miles, up the slopes and down the other side, his lungs working hard to pull enough oxygen from the thin air to fuel his muscles. You may wonder how anyone could run at such heights. The Inca heartland lies in the Andes, where many trails are at elevations of 10,000, 12,000, even 15,000 feet above sea level. At those heights, the air contains about 40% less oxygen than at sea level. For someone not accustomed to it, the effect can be dizzying, nauseating, and exhausting. You might feel a crushing headache, a shortness of breath after just walking up a flight of stairs. But the Chasquis, the runners, were born and raised in these mountains. Their bodies had adapted over generations, developing larger lungs, more red blood cells, and a more efficient cardiovascular system. Their hearts beat slower and stronger, pumping blood oxygenated just enough to keep them moving at a speed that would astonish us. There is a certain humbleness in this. To think that the Inca, with no modern understanding of physiology, knew exactly how to train these runners. Boys were selected early, maybe around 12 years old, and put through rigorous runs, first short distances, then longer and longer, until they could cover maybe 250 miles in a single day with the help of a relay system. Yes, a relay system, like a baton race, but stretched across the entire empire. Along the main road, the Quhapac Nyan, there were small stone huts called tambos, placed at intervals of about a mile or two, or sometimes a little more, depending on the terrain. In each tambo, another runner waited, ready to take the message and sprint to the next station. In this way, a message could travel from Cusco to Quito, a distance of over 1,000 miles, in about 5 days. That is nearly 200 miles a day over mountains. Let us imagine what it must have felt like to be one of those runners waiting in the tambo. The hut is small, maybe 8 feet by 8, made of rough stone and thatch. A fire burns low, just enough to keep the chill away, for the nights in the high mountains are cold, even in summer. The runner sits on a woven mat, perhaps chewing on a piece of dried llama meat or a handful of toasted corn called cancha. He listens. The silence of the mountains is immense, broken only by the occasional cry of a bird or the distant thunder of a rockfall. But his ears are tuned for a particular sound. The shrill blast of a conch shell far off, echoing between the peaks. When he hears it, he rises. He stretches his legs, adjusts his tunic, and steps out onto the path. He looks in the direction of the sound, and soon he sees a speck in the distance, growing larger. Another runner approaching fast, his breath visible in the thin air. There is a brief moment of meeting. The arriving runner, perhaps tired but still moving, hands over whatever he is carrying. It might be a quipu, the knotted string records that the Inca used for accounting and messages. It might be a small bundle of coca leaves, which the runners chewed to stave off fatigue and hunger. It might be something more unusual, like a fresh fish from the coast, wrapped in leaves, to be delivered to the emperor in Cusco, a journey of several days. Imagine that. A fish caught that morning on the Pacific shore, carried by a chain of runners over the mountains, each one doing his part, breathing the thin air and never breaking the relay. The fish would arrive still fresh, still edible, because the runners were that fast. The new runner takes the message or the bundle, and without a word, without even a nod sometimes, he is off. He has memorized the route, knows every curve, every steep section, every place where the path narrows. He runs with a long, loping stride, conserving energy. He does not sprint, for he has a long way to go, perhaps several miles to the next tambo. But he runs steadily, his arms pumping, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. He knows the dangers, a loose rock, a sudden gust of wind, the possibility of altitude sickness even for him. But he does not dwell on these things. He runs. And as he runs, he enters a kind of trance. The rhythm of his feet, the sound of his breathing, the steady beat of his heart. The mountains become a blur, but also a familiar comfort. He knows this trail like he knows his own face. He knows where the sun will be at this hour, how the shadows will fall, where the wind will pick up around the next bend. He is completely present in his body, in the moment, in the thin, cold air. Perhaps he recites a prayer to the sun god, Inti, asking for strength. Perhaps he focuses on the taste of the coca leaf in his mouth, bitter and energizing. There is something deeply peaceful about this image, is there not? A lone runner moving through a vast, silent landscape. No traffic, no sirens, no buzzing phones. Just the earth, the sky, and the purpose of getting from one point to another. The Chasqui was not a warrior. He was not a conqueror. He was a thread in the fabric of an empire, a vital connection, but also a solitary figure, spending most of his days alone on the road. And perhaps that solitude, that communion with the high peaks, gave him a kind of wisdom, a stillness that we rarely find in our noisy, hurried lives. Night falls in the mountains quickly. The temperature drops. The stars come out, so clear and bright you could almost reach up and touch them. In the distance, a conch shell blows again, a faint, mournful sound carrying across the valleys. It is the sound of the empire speaking to itself, a network of runners moving through the darkness. They have no lamps, no flashlights. They run by memory, by the feel of the path under their feet, by the stars. Some say they could run at night by following the Milky Way, which they called the Celestial River. And they would run all night if needed, their bodies moving like clockwork, passing each other in the dark with a brief greeting, a wordless exchange that kept the empire alive. Now let us slow down even more. Let us breathe with these runners. Inhale slowly, hold for a moment, and exhale. Feel the air inside you. Now imagine that air is thin, precious. Imagine your lungs working a little harder, your heart beating a little faster. But your body knows what to do. It has adapted over time, not struggling. You are simply moving as these runners moved with grace and ease in the thin air of the high Andes. The path beneath you is smooth, worn by countless feet. The wind is cool against your skin, and you are carrying something, a message perhaps, or a simple gift. And you know that someone is waiting for you at the next tambo, someone who will take that burden and carry it further, just as you took it from the previous runner. You are part of a chain, stretching across the mountains, across the sky. And now, I invite you to let that image drift away, like a cloud passing over a peak. Let your body sink deeper into the bed, the covers soft and warm. The runners have carried their messages through the night, and they are still running, in a way, in the memory of the stones and the wind. But for you, it is time to rest. The next part of the story will come, but not tonight. Tonight, you have visited a world of thin air and endless trails, and you have seen, through the eyes of a quiet storyteller, how the Incan messengers ran. You have not run with them, not yet, but you have listened, and sometimes that is enough. Sleep well and let the mountains hold you. But before you let yourself fall completely into that quiet place, before the sound of the conch fades entirely from your mind, let me whisper one more thing. Just one more scene, like a single star still glowing in the dark just before dawn. You see, the Chasquis did not only run during the day. They ran at night too, and in the darkness, their world became something else entirely. Something softer, deeper, and perhaps even more mysterious. Close your eyes for a moment, if they are not already closed. Picture the moon, a thin crescent hanging over the Andes. There is no electricity, no flashlight, no headlamp to guide the runner. Only the faint silver light and the familiar feel of the path under his bare or sandaled feet. He knows each stone, each dip, each turn by heart. He has run this stretch 100 times, 1,000 times. His muscles remember what his eyes cannot see. And so he runs on, his breathing steady, his heart a quiet drum in his chest. The only sound is the soft scuff of his feet against the earth and the distant whisper of wind through the mountain grasses. Sometimes, when the moon is full, the path glows like a river of white stone. The runner can see the peaks around him, their jagged edges softened by the pale light. He might see a fox slipping across the trail ahead, its eyes catching the moonlight for a moment before it disappears into the shadows. He might hear the call of a night bird, a low, melancholy note that echoes between the slopes, and he might feel a sense of peace that is hard to describe, a feeling of being exactly where he is meant to be at that hour, in that thin air, carrying a message that might be nothing more than a bundle of coca leaves or a report on the harvest in a distant valley. But not all nights were quiet and serene. Sometimes the wind would pick up, howling down from the high passes, tearing at the runner's tunic and making his eyes water. Sometimes the rain would come, cold and sudden, turning the path to mud and making every step treacherous. And in the highest reaches, where the air was thinnest, snow could fall even in summer, dusting the rocks with a layer of white that made the trail hard to follow. In those moments, the runner had to rely on something deeper than sight. He had to listen. He had to feel the slope of the ground, the angle of the wind, the subtle changes in temperature. He had to trust his body, which had been trained for this since childhood. Let us think for a moment about that training. How did a boy become a Chasqui? It was not simply a matter of being fast. Speed was important, yes, but endurance, patience, and a kind of steady calm were even more essential. The boys chosen for this path were usually from families of runners, a tradition passed down through generations. They began with short runs, maybe a mile or two, learning to pace themselves, to breathe correctly. They were taught to chew coca leaves, a practice that helped suppress hunger and fatigue, and to carry a small bag of toasted corn or dried meat for energy. They learned to run with a light step, to avoid wasting energy on unnecessary movement. They learned to read the land, to know where the path would be smooth and where it would be rocky, to anticipate the turns and slopes. But they also learned something else. They learned to be alone. For hours at a time, they would run by themselves, with no one to talk to, no music, no distraction. The mountains became their companion, and the silence became a friend. They learned to listen to their own breath, to feel the rhythm of their own heart. They learned to enter a state of focused calm, where the mind becomes quiet and the body moves without thought. This is something we might call a meditative state today, but for the Chasquis, it was simply part of the job. They were not trying to achieve enlightenment. They were just running, carrying a message, and trusting that the next runner would be waiting at the tambo. And at those tambos, life was simple. The huts were small, as I said, just enough to shelter one or two runners. Inside, there might be a pile of dried grass for sleeping, a clay pot for water, and a small hearth for cooking. The runner on duty would sit by the fire, watching the flames, listening for the conch. He might doze a little, but his ears remained alert. The sound, when it came, was like a thread pulling him out of his rest. He would stand, stretch, and prepare himself. Sometimes he would have a moment to exchange a few words with the arriving runner, a greeting, a question about the road ahead. But often, there was no time. The message had to keep moving. And so the relay continued day and night, through sun and storm, across the backbone of the continent. The Quhapak Nyan, the Great Road, stretched for over 25,000 miles, connecting the four corners of the Inca Empire. It was not a single road, but a network of paths, some wide enough for armies, others narrow and steep, clinging to the edges of cliffs. Bridges made of woven grass spanned deep gorges, swaying in the wind. Stairs cut into the rock climbed up the sides of mountains. And along this entire network, the Chasquis ran, a living nervous system, carrying information and goods from one end of the empire to the other. Think of the variety of messages they carried. When a new emperor was crowned, the news would spread from Cusco to the farthest provinces in a matter of days. When a harvest was good, the numbers would be recorded on quipus and sent to the capital. When an earthquake shook the land, the runners would bring word of the damage, and the emperor would send instructions for relief. And sometimes, the runners carried something more precious than information. They carried fresh fish, as I mentioned, and rare fruits, and even live animals like guinea pigs or birds, destined for the emperor's table. The speed of the relay was such that these perishable goods could travel hundreds of miles without spoiling. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, told by the Spanish chroniclers, about a Chasqui who carried a fresh fish from the coast to Cusco in less than 3 days. The fish was still cool to the touch when it arrived, and the emperor ate it that evening. Whether this tale is true or not does not matter. It captures the spirit of the runners, their dedication, their skill. They were not celebrated as heroes. They were simply doing their job, part of a system that worked with astonishing efficiency. But in their quiet, unassuming way, they were the glue that held the empire together. Now let us drift a little deeper into the world of a single chasqui, a runner we might call Wilka, a common name meaning sun. Wilka is 25 years old. He has been running since he was 12. His face is weathered, his hands calloused, his legs lean and strong. He lives in a small stone hut near the road with his wife and 2 children. He does not own much. A few tunics, a blanket, some cooking pots. But he is respected in his community, for his work is essential. He knows the road from his village to the next tambo, a distance of about 4 miles, like the back of his hand. He runs it 4 times a day, sometimes more, depending on the flow of messages. On this particular day, the morning is clear and cold. Wilka wakes before dawn, as he always does. He drinks a cup of warm water, chews a handful of coca leaves, and steps outside. The stars are still visible, fading slowly as the sky turns pale blue. He stretches his legs, bends forward to touch his toes, and then begins to jog lightly in place, warming up. He listens. No conch yet. He waits. The sun rises over the eastern peaks, painting the snow with shades of pink and gold. Wilka watches, not with awe, but with familiarity. He has seen this sunrise 1,000 times. After a few minutes, he hears it. A distant blast, faint but clear. He turns his head toward the sound, calculates the distance. About 5 minutes until the runner arrives. He walks to the edge of the path, adjusts his tunic, and waits. The speck appears, growing larger. The runner is a young man, maybe 18, breathing hard. He hands Wilka a kipu, a complex arrangement of colored strings and knots. Wilka nods, takes the kipu, and without a word, he is off. He runs with a smooth, economical stride, holding the kipu carefully in his hand. He does not look back. The road ahead climbs gently, then steepens. Wilka does not slow down. His lungs expand, pulling in the thin air. His heart pumps steadily. He knows the rhythm of this climb. He knows when to breathe in, when to breathe out. He knows that if he tries to go too fast, he will become dizzy. But he has done this so many times that his body knows the pace without conscious thought. He focuses on the path, on the feel of the ground under his feet. The world around him becomes a blur of green and brown and gray, but also a vivid tapestry of sensations. The smell of damp earth, the sound of a stream far below, the warmth of the sun on his back. Halfway to the next tambo, he passes a small shrine, a pile of stones with a few coca leaves left as an offering. He touches it briefly, a gesture of respect without slowing. He thinks of the apis, the mountain spirits who watch over the travelers. He mutters a quick prayer under his breath, asking for safe passage. Then he returns his attention to the road. The tambo appears ahead, a small hut nestled against the slope. A runner is standing outside, a woman this time, perhaps in her 30s. She holds a hand up in greeting as Wilka approaches. He slows, stops, hands her the kipu. She takes it, examines the knots quickly, then nods. She does not need to ask anything. They have done this many times before. She turns and begins to run, heading north. Wilka stands for a moment, catching his breath. He watches her disappear around a bend. Then he walks into the tambo, sits down on a mat, and takes a long drink of water from a clay jug. He is tired, but not exhausted. He will rest for an hour, then run back to his own tambo, carrying any messages that have come from the north. This is the life of a chasqui. Repetitive, demanding, but also deeply peaceful. There is no urgency beyond the urgency of the message. No ambition beyond doing the job well. The runner is part of a chain, but his link is his own, his stretch of road, his rhythm. And in that rhythm, there is a kind of freedom, the freedom of knowing exactly what to do and doing it without question, without doubt. As the day wears on, Wilka makes his return journey. The sun is high now, hot, but the air is still cool. He runs steadily, his shadow short beneath him. He passes the same shrine, the same stream, the same curve in the path. He notices that a rock has fallen onto the trail from the slope above. He pauses, moves it aside, then continues. This is part of his duty as well, keeping the road clear. The empire depends on these roads, and the chasquis are not only messengers, but also caretakers. When he reaches his own tambo, his wife is waiting with a bowl of soup. She smiles, hands it to him. He sits down, eats slowly. The soup is warm, made from potatoes and herbs. It tastes good. His children come running, asking if he saw anything interesting. He tells them about the young runner from the south, how he was breathing hard, how he handed over the kipu without a word. The children listen with wide eyes. They have heard these stories before, but they never tire of them. Perhaps one day, one of them will become a chasqui too. And so the day passes, and the night comes again. Wilka lies down on his mat, his body tired but content. He listens to the wind outside, the distant call of an owl. He thinks of the road, of the mountains, of the runners moving through the darkness. He is part of something larger than himself, something that has existed for generations and will continue long after he is gone. This thought brings him comfort, a deep, quiet satisfaction. Now, let us take that feeling and hold it for a moment. The feeling of being part of a chain, of moving with purpose through a vast and beautiful landscape. The feeling of having a job that is simple but essential, that connects you to your people and your land. Let that feeling settle into your bones, like the warmth of the soup on a cold night. Let it carry you gently, as the chasquis were carried by their own steady rhythm, toward the edge of sleep. There is still more to this story, of course. There always is. But for now, let the image of Wilka resting in his stone hut be enough. Let the sound of his breathing, slow and even, become your own breathing. Inhale the thin, clean air of the Andes. Exhale the noise and hurry of the day. Let your body become heavy, like a stone in a mountain stream. Let your mind become quiet, like the space between stars. And if you hear, in the distance, the faint sound of a conch shell, do not be startled. It is only the empire speaking to itself, a chain of runners moving through the night. But you are not part of that chain tonight. Tonight, you are a listener, a dreamer, a traveler in a world of thin air and ancient roads, and the road you are on now leads to rest. So let yourself drift. Let the story settle like a soft blanket. The chasquis will keep running, but you can stop now. You can close your eyes and feel the rhythm of your own heart, steady and sure, like the beat of a runner's feet on a mountain path. And when you wake, the story will still be here, waiting. But for now, it is enough to be still. It is enough to breathe. It is enough to sleep. And yet, the story does not end there. The roads of the Inca Empire stretched for thousands of miles, and the chasquis were but one part of a vast network of communication and control. Let us wander a little further along those paths as the night deepens and the stars wheel overhead. Let us speak of the training, of the rituals, of the quiet endurance that shaped these runners into something almost otherworldly. To become a chasqui was not a matter of choice alone. It was a calling, a selection that began in childhood. The empire looked for children who were swift, sure-footed, and unafraid of the high places. They were taken from their families sometimes, though not in the way we might imagine. There was no cruelty in it, or at least not the kind we would recognize. It was a duty, a privilege, a way to serve the Sapa Inca, the son of the sun. And so, from the age of 10 or 12, a child would begin to run. They ran not for sport, but for survival. They ran alongside older runners, learning the terrain, the rhythm, the secrets of breathing in air so thin that unaccustomed lungs would burn and ache. They learned to chew coca leaves, to extract the mild stimulant that dulled hunger and thirst and kept the legs moving. The leaves were sacred, given by the gods, and the runners treated them with reverence. A small pouch of coca was always carried, tucked into the tunic, along with a bit of llama fat or dried meat for the long stretches. The training was gradual. First, short distances between villages, then longer runs up to the high passes where the snow never melted, where the wind cut like a knife, and the sun burned cold and fierce. The children learned to read the weather, to gauge the strength of a stream before crossing, to spot the signs of a rockslide before it happened. They learned to respect the apis, the mountain spirits, and to make offerings at every shrine they passed. A handful of coca leaves, a whispered prayer, a moment of stillness, then onward. There was a saying among the chasquis: the road is not a path, the road is a river. You do not walk on it, you flow with it. And that was the secret: to flow, not to fight, to become part of the landscape, to move with the same effortless grace as the condor circling overhead. The runners did not think of themselves as athletes or heroes. They were simply the empire's voice, carried on feet. Now let us pause for a moment and consider the coca leaf itself. It is a plant that grows on the eastern slopes of the Andes, in the warm, humid valleys where the jungle begins. The leaves are small, green, and unremarkable to look at, but when chewed, they release a subtle energy, a gentle numbing of the mouth and throat, a lifting of fatigue. The runners would take a handful of leaves, add a pinch of ash or lime from a special gourd, and tuck the wad into their cheek. As they ran, The juice would seep slowly into their bloodstream, keeping them alert without the jittery edge of modern caffeine. The coca leaf was not a drug in the way we think of it today. It was a sacrament, a medicine, a companion. The runners shared it with the mountain spirits, leaving leaves at shrines as offerings. They believed that the apis themselves drank the essence of the leaf, and in return, they granted safe passage. It was a relationship of reciprocity, a give and take that sustained the runners through the harshest journeys. And those journeys were harsh indeed. The Inca road system, called the Quihapak Nyan, was one of the greatest engineering feats of the ancient world. It stretched from modern-day Colombia to central Chile, covering over 25,000 miles if you counted all the branches and side paths. It crossed deserts, jungles, and the highest mountain passes on Earth. In many places, the road was paved with stones, carefully fitted together without mortar. Steps were carved into the steepest slopes. Bridges of woven grass spanned deep gorges, and along the entire network, at intervals of about 4 to 6 miles, were the tambos, the rest stations where the chasquis could rest and hand off their messages. These tambos were simple but well stocked. A stone hut with a thatched roof, a fire pit, a supply of dried potatoes, corn, and meat, and a stack of kindling for the cold nights. Some tambos were staffed by a single family who tended the fire and kept the supplies fresh. Others were larger, serving as way stations for travelers and soldiers as well. But for the chasquis, the tambo was a place of breath, a place of exchange. A runner would arrive, hand over the quipu or a verbal message, and then collapse onto a mat, while the next runner would rise and continue the relay. The relay system was astonishingly efficient. The Spanish chroniclers, who arrived in the 16th century, marveled at the speed of the Incan communication. They wrote of messages traveling 250 miles in a single day, a feat that would have taken a European messenger a week or more on horseback. The secret was the division of labor. No single runner covered more than a few miles. Each knew his stretch of road intimately, every rock, every curve, every place where the wind might be tricky. And because they were constantly running, they were always in shape, always ready to go. But speed was not everything. The quipu, the knotted string device, was not a simple memorandum. It was a complex record, a three-dimensional code that could convey numbers, narratives, and even laws. The knots were tied in specific patterns, using strings of different colors and lengths. Each knot represented a number, and the position of the knot on the string indicated its place value, much like our decimal system. But beyond numbers, the quipu could also encode stories, historical events, and genealogies. It was a language of touch, of the fingers reading the knots like braille. The chasquis did not need to be fluent in reading the quipu, but they had to know its basic structure. They carried it carefully, keeping it dry and untangled. When they handed it to the next runner, they would often add a brief verbal message, a context for the knots. And then they would wait for the next message to come from the other direction, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Let us imagine another runner now, a different one, on a different stretch of road. Her name is Inti, another sun-named soul. She is 32, and she has been a Chasqui for 18 years, longer than most. She runs the segment from a tambo near Lake Titicaca to a pass called the Abra de la Pacheta, a high and lonely place where the wind never stops. She knows every stone on that trail, every patch of lichen, every place where the ground is slippery after rain. On a night like tonight, with the stars bright and the air still, Inti would be running by moonlight. The Incas did not have electric lights, of course, but they had the moon and the stars, and they knew how to use them. The road was often visible as a pale ribbon against the darker earth. And if the moon was new, the runners would carry a small torch of bundled straw, dipped in llama fat, which burned with a steady, smoky flame. The torch was heavy, and it required one hand to hold it, which made the run more difficult. But the Chasquis were used to it. They had their own ways of balancing the load. Inti runs at a steady pace, her breathing even. She carries a message from the governor of a province, a report on the harvest. It is not urgent, but it is important. She thinks about her daughter, who is 9 years old, learning to run. The girl is fast, but she is still afraid of the high passes. Inti remembers her own fear long ago, and how she overcame it by focusing on the path, on the next step, on the rhythm. She will teach her daughter the same way. Ahead, she sees the glow of a fire. The next tambo. She picks up her pace slightly, eager to hand off the message and rest. The runner waiting there is an older man, his hair white, his face lined. He takes the quipu from her, nods, and turns to run in the opposite direction. Inti watches him go, then sits down by the fire. She takes out her coca pouch, places a few leaves in her mouth, and closes her eyes. The warmth seeps into her bones. Now, let us consider the spiritual side of these journeys. The Incas believed that the world was alive, that every mountain, river, and rock had a spirit. The Chasquis, as they ran, were constantly in dialogue with these spirits. They offered prayers, left small tokens, and never passed a sacred site without acknowledging it. This was not superstition in the way we might think. It was a deep, practical belief that the world responded to respect. If you ignored the apu of a mountain, you might find your path blocked by a sudden storm or a falling rock. But if you honored it, the way would be clear. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, of a Chasqui who refused to make an offering at a high pass. He was young and proud, and he thought the old ways were foolish. He ran through the pass without stopping, without a word. And as he descended the other side, a mist rolled in, thick and sudden, so dense he could not see his own hand. He stumbled, lost his footing, and fell into a ravine. He broke his leg. He lay there for 2 days before another runner found him. After that, he never skipped a shrine again. The story is told among the Chasquis as a cautionary tale, but it is also a reminder that the world is watching, that the mountains have long memories. And so the runners continue the rituals, generation after generation. The offerings are small, a few coca leaves, a splash of chicha beer, a pinch of cornmeal. But the gesture is everything. Let us draw back and look at the larger picture. The Chasqui system was not just about messages. It was about the cohesion of an empire that stretched across some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. Without the runners, the Sapa Inca could not know what was happening in his provinces. He could not respond to rebellions, floods, or famines. He could not issue orders to his generals. The Chasquis were the nervous system of the Inca state, carrying signals from the heart to the extremities and back again. And they did this without riding, without horses, without wheels. They did it with human legs and human will. That is a remarkable thing to hold in your mind as you settle into sleep. The image of thousands of runners moving simultaneously across a continent in silence, through thin air, under the same stars that shine above you now. But the empire did not last. The Spanish arrived with their horses and their guns, and they broke the great chain. The runners were killed or enslaved. The tambos fell into ruin. The roads were left to the wind and the weather. And yet, the memory of the Chasquis has not faded. In the remote villages of the Andes, the people still tell stories of the runners. They point to ancient paths, now overgrown, and say, "That is where the Chasquis ran." And sometimes, on a clear night, if you listen closely, you can hear the faint sound of footsteps, the soft panting of breath, the rustle of a tunic. It is only the wind, the visitors say, but the villagers know better. Let us sit with that thought for a while. Let us imagine the ghost of a Chasqui running his eternal relay through the moonlight. He does not know that the empire is gone. He only knows his path, his rhythm, his duty. He runs past the ruined tambo, past the fallen stones of a shrine, and he does not stop. He never stops. He is a creature of the road, and the road is endless. But for you, the road ends here, at the edge of sleep. You have traveled far tonight, across mountains and centuries, alongside men and women whose names have been forgotten, but whose footsteps remain. You have breathed the thin air, felt the cold, heard the conch. Now it is time to let go. Let your body sink into the bed, your breath slow and deep. Imagine that you are lying in a stone hut, the fire dying, the stars visible through the gap in the roof. You are safe. You are warm. The runners will keep running, but you are not needed tonight. You are only a witness, a dreamer, a child of the night. Let the image of Wilka, the runner, fade. Let the image of Inti, the runner, fade. Let the roads and the mountains and the tambos dissolve into a soft blur. All that remains is the sound of your own heartbeat, steady and sure, like the feet of a Chasqui on a mountain path. And with that sound, you drift. Sleep now, beneath the thin air, beneath the ancient stars. The story is still there, waiting for you when you wake. But for now, there is only the quiet, the dark, the peace. Sleep. And so, as the night deepens and the runners continue their eternal relay, let us too find our rest. The path ahead is clear, but you do not need to follow it. Not tonight. Tonight, you are already home. But the night is long, and the past is deep. There are still more paths to walk, more runners to meet. Let us not hurry. Let us stay a while longer in the mountain silence. For the Chasquis did not only run the royal roads, they also built them, stone by stone, with hands as careful as their feet. And that story, too, is worth remembering as you lie here, warm under your blanket, the world outside growing still. The Inca road system was called the Quhapac Nyan, which means the royal road or the beautiful road. It stretched over 40,000 kilometers from the northern reaches of modern Ecuador down to the southern tip of Chile and Argentina. That is a distance greater than the circumference of the Earth itself, if you measure it as a single line. And yet, it was not a single line. It was a web, a network, a living thing that breathed with the movement of people, goods, and messages. The main spine was the highland route, running along the Andes, linking Cusco to Quito and to Santiago. Another branch followed the coast, winding through deserts and valleys. And between these two arteries, 1,000 smaller roads connected villages, tambos, and sacred sites. Building these roads was not a simple matter of clearing a path. The Incas were master engineers. They cut staircases into sheer cliffs, laid stone causeways across marshes, and suspended bridges of woven grass over roaring rivers. The bridges were so strong that they could support a man on horseback, even though the Incas had no horses. When the Spanish arrived, they were astonished to find that these bridges held them and their heavy armor. The grass ropes were replaced every year, a ritual of renewal. Imagine that, a bridge that is never more than a year old, yet carries the weight of an empire. The roads were paved with flagstones in some sections, especially near Cusco, but elsewhere they were simply packed earth, reinforced with gravel and bound with clay. They were about 1 or 2 meters wide, just enough for a runner or a llama train to pass. On either side, low walls or markers kept travelers on course. And at regular intervals, along the entire length, stood the tambos, those rest houses we have mentioned. They were spaced about 1 day's walk apart for ordinary travelers, but for the Chasquis they were closer, every 5 to 10 kilometers, so that the message could be handed off quickly. Each tambo was a small stone building, sometimes with a courtyard and a storage room. The runners did not sleep there for long. They might rest a few hours, then turn around and carry a message back. But for the other travelers, the merchants, the priests, the soldiers, the tambo was a place to spend the night. They would bring their own food or rely on the stores kept there by the state. The Incas were masters of logistics. They had warehouses filled with dried meat, maize, quinoa, and coca leaves. They had jars of chicha, the corn beer that was both a drink and a sacred offering. And they had firewood, blankets, and sandals for those who needed them. Nothing was wasted. Everything was counted, recorded on the quipus, and sent onward. Now, let us think about the training of a Chasqui. It was not something you chose lightly. Most runners began as children, often the sons and daughters of runners before them. They would run short distances at first, carrying small bundles, learning the rhythm of the breath. The high altitude was a teacher itself. It demanded respect. A child who tried to run too fast would soon find themselves dizzy, gasping, their vision swimming. They learned to pace themselves, to take the long, slow strides of a mountain runner rather than the short, quick steps of a sprinter on flat ground. They learned to lean into the uphill and to let gravity carry them carefully down, not too fast, not too slow. And they learned to read the road, the loose stones that could twist an ankle, the patches of ice that appeared without warning, the streams that swelled after rain. The training also involved memorizing the landscape. A Chasqui had to know every bend, every rock, every place where the wind howled or where the sun struck the path at a certain angle. This knowledge was not written down, it lived in the body, in the muscles, and the memory. An older runner would take a younger one along on a relay, pointing out landmarks, telling stories of the spirits that lived in the mountains. The path was not just a path, it was a story, a prayer, a conversation with the earth. There is a particular stretch of road near the village of Chaquiquoro, a ruin that is sometimes called the sister of Machu Picchu. The road there descends into a deep canyon, crosses a river on a narrow bridge, then climbs thousands of feet up the opposite wall. The Chasquis who ran that segment knew that the climb was the hardest part. They would time their runs so that they reached the bridge at a certain hour, when the light was just right, and they would stop at a small shrine halfway up the slope to offer a handful of coca leaves. They believed that if they did this, the mountain would give them strength. And perhaps it did. Or perhaps the act of stopping, of breathing, of placing a leaf on the stone was itself the strength they needed. Let us consider the physical toll of this work. Running at high altitude is not like running at sea level. The air is thin, with less oxygen. The body must work harder to deliver oxygen to the muscles. A runner in the Andes can develop a condition called chronic mountain sickness, where the blood becomes too thick and the heart strains. The Chasquis did not have modern medicine, but they had coca leaves, which contain alkaloids that help the body cope with hypoxia. They chewed them constantly, mixing them with a bit of lime ash to release the active compounds. The coca also dulled hunger and thirst, allowing them to run for hours without food or water. It was a natural tool, honed over centuries. But even with coca, the body could only do so much. The Chasquis were not superhuman, were ordinary people doing extraordinary things because their society depended on it. They suffered injuries, twisted ankles, pulled muscles, broken bones. They died on the road, sometimes from a fall, sometimes from exhaustion, sometimes from the cold. When a runner died, the closest tambo would send a replacement, and the message would continue. The empire did not stop because one heart stopped. There is a story, perhaps true, of a Chasqui who collapsed just 100 meters from the next tambo. The runner waiting there saw him fall, ran to him, but it was too late. The dying runner handed over the quipu with his last breath, and the waiting runner did not pause. He turned and ran, carrying both the message and the grief. That is the nature of the relay. You cannot stop. The message is more important than the messenger. It is a hard truth, but it is also a beautiful one, because it speaks to the devotion these people had to their work. Now, let us return to the wind, that constant companion of the Chasqui. In the high Andes, The wind is not a gentle breeze. It is a force, a voice. It screams across the passes and moans through the valleys. The runners learned to listen to it, to read its moods. A sudden shift in the wind could mean a storm coming, and they would take shelter before the hail arrived. A steady wind from the east might bring clear weather, and they would push on. They had names for different winds, just as sailors do. The wind was a partner, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel. And at night, the wind carried sounds. The barking of a fox, the cry of a condor, the distant rumble of an avalanche. For a runner alone on the road, these sounds could be frightening, but they learned to distinguish them, to know which were dangerous and which were merely the ordinary noises of the world. The sound of a puma, for example, was rare but unmistakable, a low, coughing roar that made the hair stand up. Pumas did not often attack humans, but they were known to stalk travelers, especially in the dark. The chasquis carried a sling and a few stones, but their main defense was speed and alertness. They never ran in a trance. They ran with all their senses open. Let us now think about the messages themselves. We have spoken of quipus, but what kind of messages did they carry? Some were routine, reports on harvests, census figures, inventories of storage. Others were urgent, news of a revolt, a drought, a death. The Sapa Inca, the emperor, had to know everything, and he had to know it quickly. If a village in the south rebelled, he might order an army from the north to march, and the runners would carry that order across 1,000 kilometers in a matter of days. The speed of the chasquis was legendary. The Spanish chroniclers wrote that a message could travel from Quito to Cusco, a distance of about 2,000 kilometers, in 5 days. That is an average of 400 kilometers per day, which is astonishing even by modern standards, considering the terrain. But we must be careful not to exaggerate. The relay system meant that each runner only ran a short segment, perhaps 5 or 10 kilometers, and then handed off. So the speed was cumulative. A single runner did not cover 400 kilometers. That would be impossible. But the chain as a whole could move as fast as the fastest segment. And the fastest segments were the flat, paved sections near Cusco, where a runner could sprint at a steady pace. The slowest were the high passes, where every step was a struggle against the thin air. Now let us picture a specific relay. It is the year 1500, give or take. The Sapa Inca is Huayna Capac, the great emperor who expanded the empire to its largest extent. He is in Cusco, but his generals are in the north, fighting a campaign in what is now Ecuador. A message arrives. The enemy has been defeated, and the general wants permission to advance further. Huayna Capac reads the quipu, or rather, his quipu reader interprets the knots, and he considers. He decides to grant permission. He summons a runner, a young man named Titu, who is known for his speed. Titu takes the quipu, bows, and runs. He runs through the streets of Cusco, past the stone walls of the palaces, past the Temple of the Sun, out through the northern gate. The road is broad and paved here, and he makes good time. He passes the tambo at Sacsayhuaman, then the village of Chinchero. The sun is high, but he does not slow. He knows that the relay is waiting. At the next tambo, he hands the quipu to a woman who will carry it to the next station. She is faster than him on the downhill stretches, and she takes off with a nod. And so the message travels from hand to hand, from breath to breath, until it reaches the general in his camp 3 days later. The general reads the quipu, smiles, and orders his troops to march. The empire expands by another province. The runners rest. But let us not forget that the chasquis also carried other things. Sometimes they carried small packages, a piece of gold, a rare feather, a medicinal herb. Once, according to a story, a runner carried a fish from the coast to Cusco, still fresh, wrapped in leaves and sealed with wax. He ran day and night, and the fish arrived in 2 days, never once out of the cold. The emperor ate it for his dinner and declared it delicious. The runner was rewarded with a new tunic and a bag of coca. These are the small human moments that make the vast system feel personal. The chasquis were not machines. They were people who felt joy and pain, who loved their families, who feared the dark and the loneliness. Yet they ran, because that was their role in the great tapestry of the empire. Now, as you lie here, let your thoughts drift to the sky above the Andes. It is the same sky the chasquis saw, the same stars. They followed the Southern Cross, the Pleiades, the Milky Way like a river of light. They had names for the constellations that we do not recognize: the llama, the fox, the serpent. They believed that the stars were the eyes of the ancestors, watching over them. And when a runner died, he became a star himself, a new light in the dark. So tonight, when you look up, even if you cannot see the stars through your ceiling, know that they are there, and that the chasquis are among them. And know that their footsteps still echo, not as a sound, but as a feeling, a quiet rhythm beneath the noise of the world. Let us stay here, in this quiet place, for a little while longer. The night is young, and the stories are many. Perhaps we will speak of the tambos again, or of the condors that followed the runners, or of the time a runner met a ghost on the road. But for now, let us simply breathe. Let us feel the air fill our lungs, thin and cool, and know that we are alive, and that we are connected to all those who came before. The road of time is a long one, and we are all runners on it, carrying our messages, our hopes, our dreams. And when we stop, someone else will pick up the burden and run on. So rest now. Rest in the knowledge that you have traveled far tonight, and that the journey is not over. But the path is gentle, and the company is kind. You are not alone. You are part of the relay, and the story will continue whenever you are ready to listen again. Until then, may the mountain spirits guard your sleep, and may the stars watch over your dreams. But let us linger a moment longer, for the night is deep, and the valley is wrapped in a stillness that seems to hold its breath. The stars have shifted, and the Southern Cross has tilted a little lower toward the horizon. Somewhere far away, a chasqui is still running. Perhaps it is the same relay we spoke of, or perhaps it is a different one, a message from a village far to the north, where a child has been born, and the quipu carries the news of the new life in knots of red and white. The runner moves through the darkness, his feet finding the stones by memory, his lungs working in a rhythm as old as the mountains. He does not think about the message anymore. He only thinks about the next step, the next breath, the next tambo where the fresh runner will be waiting. And what of the tambos themselves? Those small stone houses that dotted the roads every few kilometers. They were more than just rest stops. They were homes away from home for the runners, stocked with food and water, with a fire always burning. The Inca built them with care, using the same precise stonework that we see in the temples of Cusco. Each tambo had a small courtyard, a room for sleeping, and a storage area for supplies. The runners who lived there were a family of sorts, bound not by blood, but by the shared duty of the road. They knew each other's names, knew which runner was fastest on the uphill, which one could run the longest without water. They took pride in their work, and they took care of one another. On a quiet night like this, you might imagine a tambo high in the Andes, nestled in a fold of the mountains, just below a pass. The wind howls outside, but inside, the fire crackles softly. Two runners sit by the hearth, passing a small pouch of coca leaves back and forth. They do not speak much. They have learned that words are heavy at this altitude, and silence is a kind of rest. One of them is older, with gray streaks in his hair and deep lines around his eyes. He has been running for 30 years. The other is young, barely 16, and this is his first month on the road. The older runner chews a coca leaf slowly, then hands the pouch to the boy. The boy takes a leaf, places it between his cheek and gum, and waits for the gentle numbness to spread. It is a small ritual, but it binds them. The older runner finally speaks, his voice low and rough. He tells a story about a time he carried a quipu that reported a flood in the Urubamba Valley. The river had risen overnight and washed away a whole village. The message was urgent, and he ran so hard that his legs gave out 2 kilometers from the next tambo. He had to crawl the rest of the way, dragging his body over the stones, until a runner from the next station found him and took the quipu. He laughs softly, a dry, wheezing sound. He says he still has the scars on his knees. The boy listens, wide-eyed, and asks if he was afraid. The old man is quiet for a moment. He says, yes, he was afraid. But the fear was like the wind. It was always there, and you learned to run through it. That is the way of the Chasqui. They learned to live with fear, with exhaustion, with the constant whisper of the thin air that reminded them of their own mortality. But they also learned to live with joy. There were moments of great beauty, the sunrise over a glacier, the sight of a condor riding a thermal, the taste of cold water from a mountain stream. These small gifts were like stars in the darkness, and they kept the runners going. Now, let us think about the training of a Chasqui. It began in childhood, often as young as 8 or 9. Boys and girls who showed promise, who were fast, who were brave, who had good lungs were taken from their families and brought to a special school in Cusco or a provincial capital. There they were taught the ways of the road. They learned to run for hours without stopping, to carry a quipu without letting it get wet or dirty, to navigate by the stars and the sun. They were also taught the language of the knots, so that they could read simple messages if the need arose, though most of the quipu reading was done by specialists at the ends of the relay. The training was harsh. It had to be. The young runners were pushed to their limits and beyond. They ran in the heat of the day and the cold of the night. They ran uphill and downhill, on flat roads and rocky paths. They ran with stones in their pouches to simulate the weight of a quipu, and they were taught to endure pain. A runner who fell and scraped his knee was told to get up and keep running. A runner who felt dizzy from the altitude was told to breathe deeper and keep moving. The idea was not to break the spirit, but to forge it, to create a runner who could be trusted with the most important messages of the empire. And yet, for all the harshness, there was kindness too. The older runners took the younger ones under their wing, sharing their coca, their stories, their wisdom. They knew that the road could be cruel, and that a runner needed more than strength. He needed heart. The best chasquis were the ones who ran with love for their work, who felt a deep connection to the earth and the sky. They did not run to escape something. They ran to be part of something larger than themselves. We have spoken much about the physical challenges of the road, but let us also consider the mental ones. A chasqui running alone at night, under 1,000,000 stars, could feel very small. The silence of the high Andes is not like the silence of a quiet room. It is a vast, empty silence that seems to press against your ears. The only sounds are your own breathing, the crunch of your feet on the path, and the occasional distant cry of an animal. And sometimes there are sounds that have no source, a whisper of wind that sounds like a voice, a shadow that moves where there is no shadow. The Incas believed that the mountains were alive, that they had spirits called apis. These spirits could be kind or angry, and they demanded respect. A runner who passed a high peak would often leave a small offering, a coca leaf, a bundle of feathers, a stone from his home. It was a way of asking permission to cross the mountain's territory, a small gesture of humility in the face of the immense. There is a story told to me by an old man in a village near Ollantaytambo about a runner who forgot to leave an offering. He was young and proud, and he thought the old ways were silly. He ran up a high pass, and he did not stop to leave a single feather. As he topped the ridge, a sudden storm swept down from the peak. Hail the size of pebbles pelted him, and the wind was so strong he could barely stand. He stumbled and fell, and the quipu flew from his hand. He crawled around in the hail, searching for it, but the white stones covered everything. He spent half an hour finding the quipu, and by then he was cold and wet and exhausted. He made it to the next tambo, but he was sick for a week. When he recovered, he went back to that pass and left a small pouch of coca leaves at the base of the mountain. He never forgot again. These stories were not just tales, they were teachings. They reminded the runners that they were part of a world that was alive and powerful, and that the road was a sacred thing. The Inca Empire was built on a foundation of reverence for the natural world, and the chasquis embodied that reverence in every step they took. Now, let us step back and consider the larger picture. The chasquis were not the only messengers in the ancient world. The Persians had their mounted couriers, the Romans their relay stations. But the Incan system was unique because it was powered entirely by human feet over some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. There were no horses in the Americas before the Spanish came. The llamas could carry loads, but were too slow for urgent messages. So the runners were the only option, and they made that option work with extraordinary efficiency. The Spanish, when they arrived, were stunned by the speed of the chasquis. One conquistador wrote that a message could travel from Lima to Cusco, a distance of about 600 kilometers, in 2 days. He could not believe it, and he tried to test the system himself. He sent a message from the coast to Cusco, and then he rode as fast as he could on his horse, following the same route. He arrived 3 days later, and the message was already there, waiting for him. The horse was exhausted, but the runners were fresh. They had simply handed the quipu from one to another, like a bucket of water passed along a chain, and the message had moved faster than a galloping horse. This is the thing that makes the story of the chasquis so remarkable. They achieved this speed not with technology, but with organization. The empire had built a network of roads and tambos that was carefully calibrated to the human body. The distances between tambos were based on how far a runner could run at a steady pace in the thin air. The supplies were calculated to provide enough calories for the exertion. The timing of the relays was synchronized so that a runner never had to wait long for the next one. It was a system of such precision that it still makes us marvel 500 years later. As you lie here, let your mind wander along those ancient roads. Imagine the stones worn smooth by millions of footsteps. Imagine the small shrines at the side of the path where runners would stop for a moment to pray. Imagine the red dust rising in the afternoon light and the smell of iku grass and cold air. It is a world that is gone now, but it is not completely lost. The roads still exist in fragments. The tambos are ruins, but their stones are still there, telling a silent story of the runners who once slept inside. And the spirit of the chasqui lives on in every long-distance runner who pushes through the pain, in every messenger who carries a crucial piece of news, in every person who walks a long road alone. The relay is not finished. It continues in ways we do not always recognize. When you hear the sound of footsteps outside your window late at night, it might just be a neighbor coming home, but it might also be the echo of a chasqui, still running, still carrying a message from the past to the future. Let us pause here, in this quiet moment. The fire in the tambo has burned down to embers, and the old runner has fallen asleep, his head resting on a folded cloak. The boy is still awake, staring into the coals, thinking about the flood and the scars and the coca leaf in his mouth. He will run tomorrow and the day after, and for many years after that. He will become an old runner himself, with lines on his face and stories in his heart. And when he dies, he will become a star, and the boy who takes his place will look up and see him, a faint light in the Milky Way running across the sky. So rest now, for the night is long and the stories are deep. There is no need to hurry. The road will still be there in the morning, and the messages will wait. For now, let the warmth of the fire seep into your bones, and let the sound of the wind become a lullaby. You have traveled far tonight, and you have earned this stillness. The Chasquis would understand. They knew that rest was not a luxury, it was a necessity. They knew that to run well, you must also sleep well. And so they slept, curled up in their tambos, with the mountains keeping watch. And perhaps in your dreams, you will join them. You will step onto the road, feel the cool earth under your feet, and run with the wind at your back. You will carry a quipu that contains the entire story of the world, from the first sunrise to the last sunset, and you will pass it on to the next runner, who will pass it on, until the message reaches its destination, somewhere beyond the stars. But let us, for a moment, linger in that dream and step more fully into the world of the Chasqui. The dream is not a flight of fancy. It is a reflection of a reality that was once as solid as the stone beneath your feet. In the high Andes, the line between waking and dreaming was never quite as sharp as we draw it today. The Incas believed that the world of the spirits was just as real as the world of the visible, and that dreams were a way of receiving messages from the ancestors, from the mountains, from the stars. A Chasqui who had a vivid dream about a difficult stretch of road might wake up with a new understanding of how to navigate it. He might see a shortcut in his sleep, or a warning about a loose boulder. The dream was not something to be dismissed. It was a gift, a piece of the map that could only be read with the eyes closed. And so, when you close your eyes tonight, you are not simply escaping the day. You are entering a landscape that the Chasquis knew well, a landscape of stars and silence, and the soft murmur of the wind over the peaks. It is a landscape where the road does not end, but continues into the shadows, and where the sound of your own heartbeat becomes the rhythm of a runner's feet. Let us now follow one of those runners, not in a dream, but in the quiet hours of an early morning, just before the sun touches the highest peaks. The tambo is a simple stone shelter, low and snug against the wind. Inside, the fire has been kept alive all night by the keeper, an older man who no longer runs, but who tends the flames and the stores of dried meat and maize. He is called the Tambo Guardian, and his job is to ensure that every runner who arrives finds warmth, food, and a place to rest. He knows the runners by name, or at least by the sound of their feet on the path. He can tell from the way they breathe whether they have pushed too hard, whether the air is thin that day, whether they need extra coca, or just a long drink of water. The runner we are following is a man named Wayna, which means young, though he is not so young anymore. He has been running the roads for 7 years, since he was 15. His face is weathered, his hands calloused, but his legs are still strong, and his lungs have learned to work with the thin air. He wakes before the first light, as he always does. There is no alarm, no clock. The body knows when it is time. He lies still for a moment, listening to the crackle of the fire, the soft breathing of the other runner who shares the tambo tonight. runner will leave later, heading in the opposite direction, carrying a quipu of his own. They do not speak much in the mornings. Words are heavy at this altitude. A nod, a glance, a shared handful of toasted maize. That is enough. Wayna sits up and stretches. The air inside the tambo is smoky and warm, but outside, he knows, it is cold. He pulls on his ashuta, the thick sandals made from llama hide, and wraps his cloak more tightly around his shoulders. He checks his quipu, which he has kept under his head as a pillow. The strings are still in order, the knots firm. He runs his fingers over them, reading the message one last time before he sets out. The knots speak of grain stores in a village to the north, of the number of warriors needed for a new outpost in the east, of the health of the llama herds in a high valley. It is a simple message, but urgent. The governor of a province has sent it, and it must reach Cusco within 2 days. That means Wayna will run hard, and he will hand the quipu to the next runner at a tambo halfway up the pass. He takes a handful of coca leaves from a small pouch at his belt. He places them in his cheek, one by one, pressing them into a ball. The taste is bitter, grassy, but it wakes him up. He chews slowly, letting the juice mix with the ash from a small piece of lime he adds from a gourd. The combination releases the alkaloids that dull the ache in his muscles and sharpen his mind. He will chew coca throughout the run, not in a rush, but as a steady companion. It is not a stimulant in the way we think of coffee or tea. It is more of a balancer, a way of staying in tune with the demands of the body. He stands and walks to the door. The guardian hands him a small bundle of dried meat and a gourd of water. There is no ceremony. The guardian simply nods, and Wayna steps out into the pre-dawn twilight. The stars are still bright overhead, but the eastern sky is beginning to pale, a faint glow behind the dark mass of the mountains. The air is so cold that it feels sharp in his nose, almost metallic. He takes a deep breath, feeling the oxygen rush into his lungs, thin but enough. He begins to walk, not run yet. He needs to warm up his legs, to let the blood flow slowly. He knows better than to sprint from the start. Ode is long, the air is thin, and the body must be coaxed into its rhythm. The path descends briefly from the tambo, then begins to climb. It is a steady, unrelenting gradient, the kind that makes your thighs burn after a few minutes. Wayna does not fight it. He shortens his stride, leans slightly forward, and lets his arms swing in a relaxed motion. He finds a pace that feels sustainable, a pace he could hold for hours. His breath comes in even cycles, 2 steps inhale, 2 steps exhale. The rhythm becomes a meditation, a way of emptying the mind of everything except the road and the breath. As the sun breaks over the eastern ridge, the world transforms. The shadows grow long and purple, the rocks turn golden, and the sky becomes a deep, clear blue. Wayna can see far across the high plateau to the snowy peaks that mark the horizon. He knows each peak by name, each one an Apu, a sacred mountain. He murmurs a prayer to them as he runs, a quiet chant that his father taught him. It is not a plea for help, but an acknowledgement of their presence. You are here, he says in his mind, and I am here. We travel together. The road is not empty. He passes a small caravan of llamas, led by a woman in a bright red shawl. She waves to him, and he raises a hand in greeting. The llamas look at him with their calm, curious eyes, their ears twitching. They are carrying bundles of dried potatoes and woven cloth. The woman is taking her goods to a market in the next valley, a journey of several days. She walks at a steady pace, unhurried, as she has done hundreds of times. The road is her home as much as it is Wena's. They belong to the same landscape, the same rhythm of movement and rest. About an hour into his run, Wena reaches a small shrine by the side of the path. It is a pile of stones, with a small hollow in the center where offerings are placed. He slows to a walk and reaches into his pouch. He takes a few more coca leaves, places them in the hollow, and adds a small stone he picked up at the last tambo. He stands for a moment, his hand resting on the cool rock, and he breathes. The wind blows across the pass, carrying the scent of snow and dry grass. He feels a sense of peace, a connection to the countless runners who have stopped here before him. They are all part of the same thread, the same unending relay. He resumes running. The sun is higher now, and the air is warming. He loosens his cloak and lets it hang open. Sweat begins to form on his brow, but he does not wipe it away. The salt on his skin feels clean, honest. His legs have settled into the rhythm, and the pain in his calves has faded into a dull hum. This is the state that runners call the flow, a kind of floating where the effort becomes effortless, where the body seems to move on its own, and the mind drifts into a soft, dreamlike awareness. It is at moments like this that the chasqui is most open to the stories of the road. The stones themselves seem to whisper. They tell of the runners who came before, of the messages they carried, of the loves and losses and hopes that were tied into the knots of the quipus. Wena thinks of the great flood, the one that swept away the bridge 3 years ago. A chasqui named Kuntu had been carrying a message about an outbreak of disease in a coastal village. The flood had taken the bridge, but Kuntu had swum across the swollen river, holding the kipu above his head with one hand. He had lost his cloak, his sandals, nearly his life, but the kipu had stayed dry. The message had reached Cusco in time, and the disease had been contained. Kuntu had become a legend, his story told around every fire in the chain of tambos. Wena does not think of himself as a legend. He is just a man running. He does his job, and he does it with care. When he reaches the tambo at the top of the pass, he is breathing hard, but not gasping. The guardian there, a woman this time, takes the kipu from his hands. She inspects it quickly, then hands it to a younger runner who is waiting, his legs already loose with warm-up stretches. The young runner, a boy of maybe 12, looks at Wena with wide eyes. He has not been running long, and he still has the nervous energy of youth. Wena gives him a smile, a nod of encouragement. The boy takes the kipu, tucks it into his belt, and sets off down the other side of the pass, his feet light and fast. Wena sits down on a stone bench outside the tambo. He drinks water, eats a piece of dried meat. He will rest here for a few hours, then run back in the afternoon, carrying a return message. The cycle continues, day after day, year after year. The road is a living thing, a pulse that never stops. As you lie in your bed, think of that boy running down the other side of the pass. The sun is high now, and the shadows are shrinking. He is young, and his lungs are still adjusting to the thin air. He will learn as Wayna learned, as all Chasquis learn. He will learn to pace himself, to listen to his body, to respect the mountains. He will learn the stories, the prayers, the small rituals that turn a run into a pilgrimage. And in time, he will become one of the old ones, the ones who have run so many miles that the road is etched into their bones. He will sit by the fire in the tambo, chewing coca, telling stories to a younger runner who listens with wide eyes. And he will know, with a certainty that goes deeper than words, that the relay is eternal. The messages change, the knots tell new tales, but the road remains. It is the same road that the ancestors built, the same road that the Spanish marveled at, the same road that still waits for anyone willing to put one foot in front of the other. There is a particular tambo I remember, one that stood on a high ridge above the Urubamba River. The stone walls were thick, and the roof was made of iku grass, thatched so tightly that not a drop of rain could get through. Inside, the floor was packed earth, smooth as marble from decades of use. There was a small fire pit in the center, and around the walls, niches for storing quipus and bundles of coca. The guardian, there was a woman named Ilari, which means dawn. She had been a runner in her youth, but her knees had given out after too many years on the steep descents. She had taken up the role of guardian with the same dedication she had given to running. Every runner who arrived at her tambo was greeted with a cup of warm water mixed with ground maize and a pinch of salt, a simple drink that restored the body better than anything else. Ilari knew the stories of every runner who passed through. She remembered the one who had arrived with a broken arm, still clutching the kipu, having run the last 10 kilometers with one arm dangling uselessly. She remembered the one who had stayed for 3 days because a blizzard had buried the pass, and she had fed him and kept the fire burning while he recovered. She remembered the one who had never come back, the one whose body was found at the bottom of a ravine, the kipu still clutched in his hand. She had wept for him, and she had sent a new runner with a duplicate kipu, because the message must always go through. The life of a Chasqui was not always glorious. It was often lonely, often painful, often dangerous. But it was also filled with moments of profound beauty. The sunrise over a sea of clouds, the flash of a condor's wing against the blue, the sound of a distant flute carried on the wind. These were the gifts of the road, the things that made the Chasqui feel connected to something vast and sacred. They did not run for fame or reward. They ran because the road called them, because the empire needed them, because the rhythm of their feet was a prayer that kept the world in balance. And now, as the hour grows late and the moon rises high above your window, think of the quietness that follows a long run. Stillness in the muscles, the soft emptiness in the mind, the deep satisfaction of having moved through the world on your own 2 feet. That feeling is not so different from the one we seek in sleep. It is a letting go, a surrender to the pull of rest. The Chasquis understood that the best runs end with a slow walk, followed by a long sit by the fire, followed by a sleep so deep that you forget where you are until the guardian's hand on your shoulder tells you it is time to run again. So let yourself drift. Feel the warmth of the blankets, the softness of the pillow. You do not have to run tonight. The road will be there in the morning, and the messages will wait. For now, you are the runner who has finished his leg of the relay, and you have earned the right to close your eyes. The stars are out, the mountains are silent, and the tambo of your own bed is safe and warm. And somewhere in the high Andes, a new day is beginning. A runner is waking in the darkness, reaching for his coca pouch, tightening his sandals. He does not know you, but he is carrying a message that will eventually reach around the world through the centuries to touch your dreams. It is a message of endurance, of connection, of the simple and profound act of putting one foot in front of the other. Listen. The wind is picking up outside. It might be the sound of a runner passing through, or it might be the breath of the mountains speaking to you in a language older than words. Either way, you are part of the story now. You have walked the road with the Chasquis, and the road will never let you go. Rest, friend, rest easy. The relay continues, but for you, the night is still. And that is enough. The tambo at night has a different kind of life. The fire burns low, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and the scent of iku grass mingles with the smoke. Outside, the wind whispers through the stone cracks, a sound that could be mistaken for the breath of a sleeping giant. The guardians know these sounds. They know when the wind carries the promise of rain, when it carries the cold of the high peaks, and when it carries nothing but silence. That silence is the most precious of all, for it means the road is at peace and the runners can rest. There's a story Alari used to tell on nights when the silence was deep and the fire was just embers. She would speak of a runner named Wilka, a man who had run the longest relay of his life, a marathon of days from the border of the empire to the heart of Cusco. He had carried a quipu that held the news of a great victory, a battle won against the jungle tribes. Every tambo along his route had been waiting, and he had been greeted with cheers, with the warm drink, with the touch of hands that knew what he had done. But by the time he reached Cusco, he was not triumphant. He was hollowed out. The joy of the victory had been replaced by the ache of the journey. He delivered the quipu, then walked to the edge of the city, sat down under a tree, and wept, not from sadness, not from pain, but from the weight of having carried something that mattered so much. The other runners understood. They did not ask him why. They simply gave him space, and when he was ready, they brought him back to the fire. That is the way of the road. It asks everything of you, but it also gives back a kind of peace that is hard to find anywhere else. The Chasqui learns to hold both the lightness of victory and the heaviness of distance in the same breath. As you lie there, the soft warmth of the blanket over your shoulders, think of Wilka under his tree. The tears are not a sign of weakness. They are a release, a letting go of the tension that has built up mile after mile. They are the body's way of saying, I have done my part. Now I can rest, and so can you. The night is deep, and the stars are steady. The mountains outside your window are not the Andes, but they are mountains nonetheless, rising in the dark with a quiet dignity. They have watched over this valley for centuries, and they will watch over you tonight. There is no message you need to carry, no relay to run. The only thing you need to do is breathe slowly, deeply, the way the chasqui breathes when he finally sits down and lets the miles fall away. The fire in the tambo has burned down to ash. The guardian will add a log before she sleeps, but for now, there is only the soft glow of dying embers and the sound of a runner snoring lightly in the corner. He has earned his rest. He will wake before dawn, lace his sandals, and go again. But that is a story for another hour. For this hour, the story is yours. You have run with Wayna and Alari and Wilka, and you have felt the thin air in your lungs and the stone under your feet. You have seen the condor and the sacred peaks and the endless road winding into the mist. Now the road has brought you here, to this soft place, to this quiet night. The relay continues, yes, but you are not in the relay. You are the one who has stepped off the path for a while, and that is allowed. The road will wait. The messages will wait. Tomorrow you can think of the chasquis again, but tonight, let your thoughts dissolve like smoke from the fire. Let the last image be that of a young runner, the boy from the pass, now sleeping in a tambo far away. His dreams are full of running, full of hills and rivers, and the sound of his own heartbeat. Your dreams can be anything you want. Close your eyes. The night is still, and that is enough.